Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Grace and peace to you. My name is Brian Ellison. I am Executive Director of the Covenant Network of Presbyterians. My pronouns are he and him, and it is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this event, which has been more than a year in the making. I just was talking with Cindy. We had a conversation about this event more than a year ago, and I'm so overjoyed at the enthusiasm and the response and the commitment that has come together in our being here together on this day. I'm going to open us in prayer. Let us pray. Eternal God, we gather this day in a spirit of joy and a spirit of hope. We gather in a spirit of longing for a church that is as generous and just as your grace. We gather in a spirit of openness to hear the places where your people are hurting, where injustice is present, where brokenness stands in need of healing. We gather in a spirit of readiness to be equipped, to be challenged, to learn and grow, to share and connect. We gather in a spirit of praise, knowing that by your Spirit all things are possible. New life can begin, church and world can be transformed. And so, God, we offer ourselves this day to you and offer all of these speeches and all of these workshops. We offer them twice. And we ask this all in Christ's name. Amen. They say that preachers love the sound of their own voice, but that's not really what that meant. It is my pleasure to introduce to you as someone I think many of you already know, the connectional presbyter and stated clerk of Newcastle Presbytery, who will bring us a land acknowledgement as we start our day.
Thank you. Thank you. It is so good to see you all here today. Thank you for joining us. And it is appropriate and essential to begin by recognizing where we gather. Those of us who are here in Dover, those of us who are joining online, wherever you may be joining from. This was the homeland of the Lenni Lenape and the Nanticoke people who lived here for generations, fishing the waters, enjoying the beauty of the season in this place. This is one of the things that the Nanticoke and Lenape Confederations say about themselves and their ancient way of life. Our Lenape and Nanticoke ancestors were peace-loving and given to hospitality. We lived in harmony with the natural world around us in small communities and had wigwams and longhouses as homes. The men hunted and fished while the women grew crops. Men were charged with protecting the village while women were charged with care for their homes. The village chief led by example and personal sacrifice and conferred with a council of respected great ones and elders. We wore clothes of animal skins decorated with shell and bone heads and sometimes with natural pigments. We honored the Creator and the Creator's appointed guardian spirits by respecting all life and never taking more from nature than we could use. That respect for life meant that if an animal was taken for food, all of the animals should be used in some way in order to show gratitude for the sacrifice of its life to sustain ours. As we meet and discuss harm that we have done as church, it is also important to recognize, acknowledge, and begin to seek to repair the harm we did to the first people in this land, who sang the first songs, who played the first games, and who gathered here as family and friends. And so we hold their story and their continued presence, even as we talk about how we can be better stewards of land as well as better stewards of hospitality and welcome.
Amen. As we begin this day, we have a number of people to acknowledge without whom this day is possible, and because I'm a smart executive director, I'm going to start with my board of directors of the Covenant Network of Presbyterians, who want to welcome you. And so we are pleased that our board actually had a board meeting in Wilmington yesterday, our national board from all over the country. And so more than half of our board is actually here at this event, which is a first. So we're delighted, and you'll get to meet many of them, including our co-moderators. So let me introduce you to Matt Gaventa and Slats Toole.
Good morning. Yes. Good morning. My name is Matt Gaventa. I am the senior pastor of University Presbyterian Church in Austin, Texas. So I bring you greetings from the Central Time Zone and a warmer climate. Though, as a child of New Jersey myself, it was wonderful to get here and feel some cold autumn on my face. I do bring you greetings from the board of directors of the Covenant Network, and if you are a board member of the Covenant Network and you're here in this room right now, would you stand up just so we can visualize and see folks that are here with us? And on behalf of the board and its mission, I also just want to offer a word of thanks to the Presbyterian Church in Dover and to Newcastle Presbytery for hosting this event, for putting on this event, and being so eager to participate in this kind of conversation and to participating in this ministry and in this mission.
My name is Slats Toole. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I'm coming to you from Minneapolis, Minnesota. So I have the opposite experience where I am glad to have gone from winter back into fall. The Covenant Network is a network of over 400 churches and thousands of individuals, and we really love living into the network part of our name. As our mission has shifted since polity has changed in the PCUSA, we've moved towards engaging churches to offer a welcome to all people, people of all gender identities and sexual orientations. We seek to educate churches and ourselves, as we are always learning and growing, on how we can widen that welcome and to equip those communities to be able to witness publicly. So we are hoping that this event will live up to not only all three of those E's that we very poetically put into our mission statement, but the network part of this. It is, as these covenant conversations have become one of our primary focuses, one of the beautiful things that I have seen is folks who are all working and all care about these issues in the same area, being able to meet each other and connect and find support and fellowship. And so I hope that not only will you learn from the workshops and plenaries and experience the welcoming worship today, but that you will have an opportunity to connect with each other and have that sustaining relationship for the work to come. Thank you.
We absolutely would not be able to do this without the support and welcome and hospitality of the Presbyterian Church of Dover, and so it's my pleasure to introduce our host pastor, the Reverend Mark Parsons.
On behalf of the members and friends of the Presbyterian Church of Dover, welcome. We pray that today is a wonderful experience for you, and you may have questions along the way about where things are. Most of our helpers who are, hey, won't you come in? Come in. You'll see that they have usher tags on. And if you should need to know where something is, you can ask someone with the usher tag. And also want to thank in the booth today, Tom. Say hello, Tom. Tom is helping with tech today in the first half of the day, and Barb will be in the second half of the day. You're going to notice as you go around the building, orange signs. Those orange signs were put up just for you to make things easier to find. So look for the bright orange sign and maybe you'll find your way if an usher's not there to help you. And again, welcome, welcome, welcome.
I could have introduced them all at once, so I didn't have to keep jumping up here, but it is the other group with whom this would not have been possible, without whom this wouldn't have been possible, and is the co-sponsor of this event, is Newcastle Presbytery. These events only really mean anything when they are expressions of our covenant life together, and so the support of Newcastle Presbytery it means the world to what we're doing here today and to the Covenant Network. And so my thanks not only to Cindy, but to Tracy Keenan, who is missional presbyter and will now bring a word of greeting from the presbytery.
Good morning, everyone. I am Tracy Keenan, missional presbyter, pronouns she, her. And we welcome you to Newcastle Presbytery. I have to tell you a little brief story. Last summer, not this past summer, but the one before that at General Assembly, I was an assistant for one of our committees. And there was a pastor there that I thought was just really good, really strong. So anyway, I liked this person. And then he got in touch with me. To ask if there were any positions in Newcastle Presbytery that he might be interested in. And I want to tell you, I've been in this presbytery 4.5 years, and what I'm about to say is going to sound like back in my day. But there's this sense of where we are, where we're coming, how things are moving. And so much of the time, we hear stories about, like, the church is dying, and, everything is awful and so forth. And I want to tell you some really good news stuff. What happened? Here's an example, a perfect example of that. This person, Mark Parsons, became really excited about the Dover church. And true confessions here, true confessions. I was thinking, I don't know if they're ready for an openly gay pastor. They all fell in love with each other, and this is... I know. Exactly. This is exactly the good news that I am talking about. And this place is sparkling. It is growing. There are new members there. Nobody's really excited about that. That's not the only story. We have several stories, several stories of churches who are sparkling, right? Right? We have certain churches that are just showing this new life, this new love, this new openness, this new welcoming. And that is part of what we are about today, because we see there's so many times when we think, everything's going, And we have to keep our eyes open for those places where God's Spirit is working really excitingly and beautifully and in ways that we might never have imagined. So we welcome you here because that's what you all are here about, welcoming, including, understanding God's presence and God's Spirit in a more expansive and beautiful and rich and exciting way. So welcome.
So for our plenary session today, our plenary session has two parts. Although the Covenant Network of Presbyterians has hosted these events all over the country, each of them reflects the priorities and the plans of a local planning team. And I'm going to thank them at the end of the day, but just so you have a sense of it, let me invite those of you who've been part of our planning committee calls to stand so you can see the great minds that have been part of bringing today to fruition. In the second part of our plenary, we're going to have a little panel conversation where we're going to hear a variety of stories of experiences about being LGBTQ in the church and what it has meant and what it can mean. But we're going to start with something that the planning team thought was a really high priority, which is to kind of get us all on the same page in terms of the language we're using as we talk about gender and sexuality. And so I want to introduce our leaders for this part of our plenary session. Many of you know the Reverend Brooke Scott, who is pastor at Church on Main in Middletown, and you should get to know the Reverend Alex Hendrickson, who is chaplain at Easton College in Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania. There you are.
Lafayette College, Easton, Pennsylvania. Understandable. So thank you all for welcoming us. You have a packet of information. You do not have to follow along with this packet. But the reason we provided this for you is that we are going to do something that pedagogically is not really the way we like to operate, which is we're going to zoom through a bunch of slides without taking lots of questions.
Or breaths.
Or breaths, okay. Wow, all right, Brooke, I don't know if we talked about that. So yeah, do you want to introduce a little bit what we are doing today?
Yes, hello everyone and welcome. My name is Brooke Scott and we are going to walk you through some grounding definitions and terminology. We understand that everybody is coming here from different places. We all have heard different words and terminologies. A lot of them might be new, a lot of them might be confusing, so we're going to break some things down, have a little bit of space for questions just so that you kind of all go into the sessions today and be able to ask questions with a shared understanding. Fair? Okay, awesome, cool.
So my ministry is with college students. So I just want you to put your college student hat on, which means be skeptical about what I say. Also know that you probably know more than I do. Great, these are all great things. And I invite you, as we move through this day, to come up and disagree with some of the things that Brooke and I might say, or ask us questions about some of the things we might say. Also, this is a resource for you. There is also a trifold resource for you that if you are in Brooke's session, you're going to hear more about. She's offering her session twice, so you should get a chance to hear her. But just very quickly, want to talk about our goals. Again, we're talking about language and terminology. We want to understand what are we talking about when we're saying sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression. We want to know a little bit more about not only what these identities mean for other people, but what do they mean for ourselves? And again, some of us chose pronoun pins as we came in. That is part of this conversation. And part of this day is to cultivate relationship, to think about people in our lives that we maybe want to have a different kind of relationship than we've had in the past. And the one that's really important to me is what you're doing today is a spiritual practice. Mm-hmm. This is a very Presbyterian way to talk about things, right? But I mean this. What we're doing today, educating ourselves, being in conversation, being challenged, this is at the core of what it means to be Presbyterian. So good job, Presbyterians.
Okay, awesome. So in order to ground ourselves, we're going to talk about some of the covenants of Covenant Network that we can all agree to share together today. You may have also heard these in other places, shared agreements or norms of the space. But one of them obviously is going to be speak for yourself and your experiences. So there's going to be opportunities for you to share, for you to ask questions. And you always want to name that you're speaking from your own perspective or your own experience. We don't want to make any assumptions. So use I statements. If you've ever been to therapy, that's one of the ways that they talk about communication, is always to name I statements, not to speak for somebody else. Listen for understanding, not just to answer or respond, but to really understand where folks are coming from. Agree to disagree, as Alex already referenced. Give unconditional respect to yourself and others. We recognize that with respect to respecting yourself, that we want to have grace for ourselves. A lot of this is really new and really different than what we may have been exposed to before. And so give yourself grace and patience as you're moving through new information, as well as grace for everyone around you. Take care of yourself. I will mention this later in my session, but brief mention of difficult topics such as suicide, mental health conditions may come up. So those are just some of the examples of things that may be difficult. There may be things that are hard for you to hear. Take care of yourself. No one will judge you. If you need to take a step out, if you need to walk outside, nothing I don't think will be too bad, but we recognize that everything is going to hit everybody a little bit differently. And we have a chaplain who will be introduced. No one has the right to out someone without consent. This is very, very important. So outing is when you are sharing the identity of somebody, sharing someone's LGBTQ identity. And so we want to recognize that in this space, you might get really excited and be like, my granddaughter who's trans. Your granddaughter doesn't know us, right? And so unless that person has given you permission to share, try to keep them anonymous or don't use their name or any identifying information. If that person is fine with you sharing, that's totally fine, but we don't want to assume that because they're out in one space that they're out in every space. So we are not outing anybody here.
Especially because I'm reminded in these events how small our Presbyterian world is.
Yes.
So when you think you might, they don't know who I'm talking about. Oh, maybe they do. All right, so here is another thing that Presbyterians are very good at, litany. We are going to work on getting comfortable with maybe saying some things that we aren't used to saying. So I'm going to ask you to say out loud, we may be talking about folks who are lesbian. Many folks might be gay. They might be bisexual. They might be transgender. Queer. Questioning. Intersex. Asexual. And all sorts of other kinds of identities that they get to define for themselves. Now, I want to use a little note about language. Again, I mentioned I work with college students. It, for a long time, was not always okay to use the word queer. That was not often considered a nice thing to say. Many, not all, many of my college students really have reclaimed that word. So I will often use the word queer because that is what my college students have asked me to use. And so just being aware of that as we often, the last couple of days with the board, have talked about our different generational differences. I am a Gen Xer, don't forget about me. So just be aware that different folks have different language they might use to discuss their identities.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to go through some gender terminology. These are words that you may hear throughout the day, words that you may have already heard, but we're going to really try and break this down because I know that this is a difficult one. This is a difficult one for me as I have been learning about these things. And so I want to take the time to really slow us down and figure out what the heck are people talking about when they're talking about gender. So we're going to start with sex, or sex assigned at birth. This is the announcement by doctors. So when a baby is born and a doctor says it's a boy or it's a girl based off of external body parts, that is sex. This is based on anatomy, hormones, chromosomes, all kinds of things like that. Intersex This is one of the words that we just said out loud in the acronym. This describes individuals who are born with characteristics that are not exclusively male or female. This can vary really widely. This can be things that are visible at birth. This could also be things that we notice over time, particularly around puberty, differences in distribution of hormones. There's a wide range of what it can look like. It's not always something that you can see even at birth, and so we want to leave a really wide spectrum there. Gender identity, different, these are all different, again. Gender identity is how one sees themselves. So that's not what the doctor said. That is how one sees themselves. And so that refers to an individual's internal sense of themselves. A person's gender identity may be different or the same as a person's sex assigned at birth. So a person may come to think of themselves as a man or a woman, and that may be the same or different than was expressed at birth. Gender expression, also different, refers to the manner in which one expresses to the world who they are. And so hair, makeup, mannerisms, speech, actions, all of those things are how one lives out their gender in the world. And again, these things may match, but they may also not match. It's important to recognize that while these things are related, they are not the same.
I think Brooke was right that we're not really taking a lot of breaths here. So I just thank you for hanging with us as we speed through all of this information. So many of you have heard the term transgender, so we just want to take a minute again to drill down a little bit. Describes individuals whose gender identity, which Brooke just spoke about, is different than the sex they were assigned. It's a boy, it's a girl, the sex they were assigned at birth. So the Williams Institute, when I first made these slides a number of years ago, the numbers were smaller. The numbers now, most recent numbers from 2022, about 0.5% to 1.6% of the US population identifies. Now, that number is probably higher than that for lots of reasons. Yes, people are doing this, and that's right. The numbers are probably higher than that, but this is current statistics, just to give you a floor, not a ceiling for this number. Gender nonconforming describes people whose gender expression differs from stereotypic expectations. Other terms you might hear are non-binary, genderqueer, or agender. These are just some examples of the wide variety of language that is used. And again, gender nonconforming individuals, this is confusing. It's nonconforming, may identify as male, female, some combination of both or neither. They may or may not identify as transgender.
Can I add?
Yes, and I was just going to say, I hope that we're getting in here that this is complicated and nuanced, and
Yes.
we are speeding through. Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to add, may or may not identify as transgender. So if someone says, I'm non-binary, again, it may technically fall under your gender identity is different than what you were assigned at birth, but they may or may not want to use that label for themselves. And so, again, these are very general definitions, but each person is going to be individual. So this requires relationships. It requires respect. It requires, what does that mean to you? What does that look like in your life? What terms are you comfortable with? This is all going to require a little bit of effort on our part because everyone is so unique.
So we're going to go from gender to now talking about, so gender is who I am. Now we're going to talk a little bit about sexual orientation, which is about who I'm thinking about being in relationship with. So again, when I talk about my sexual orientation, that's more of an outward-facing relationship. Who am I attracted to romantically? Who am I interested in physically? But emotionally, intellectually, There are so many ways that you can talk about sexual orientation. And again, we think of this romantic and sexual, this is really not a binary. Let's remind ourselves, so many things we're talking about today are not going to fall on a binary. Do you have anything you want to say on this one?
Yeah, I was going to say, we see that there are different types of sexual orientations that we named earlier. We have gay, lesbian, bisexual, asexual. That's the shortened word for ace. For asexual is ace. And so there is a wide variety of where people can fall. It's important to know that this is a spectrum. It's something that can be fluid. It's something that can change over time. It can look different at different times in your life. It can depend on the person. It can depend on the situation. All of that stuff is what we're trying to get at here. And again, this is very different than who you identify yourself as a person versus what kind of people you're interested in. Those are different, right? And so bisexual, for example, is one of those orientations that makes us grapple with things not being binary, things not always being one or the other, right? Bisexual is someone who is attracted to multiple genders, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same way or exactly the same degree. It can fall somewhere along here, and it still counts. There are no gay police, but it counts.
And so this last one is just kind of a fun, this slide is just kind of a fun little graphic for you to see. And this is speaking about all of the different slides that came before. So again, the difference between gender identity, gender expression, sex, and then physical, emotional attraction. We just are thinking about this beautiful little unicorn as representing a lot of these different identities. I don't know what this unicorn's name is, but I think they're very cute. I really like them.
Yeah, I love this. This unicorn, some people may have also seen the gingerbread, same idea. The gingerbread, I think, was made by straight people. This one. So we like to use this one because it was made by trans youth. So, in support of the people who created it, I think it's a really good representation. It's kind of silly and goofy looking, but it's really, really good at being able to break down, even in yourself, like if you are somebody who, you're cisgender, meaning that your identity matches what you were assigned at birth, and you're straight, you still have a gender identity. You still have a sexual orientation. It's not just about people who aren't those things. And so even for yourself, being able to understand where do you fall along these lines as a way to talk about these things is building empathy for those who differ than you.
All right, we're switching gears a little bit here to talk about pronouns, gender pronouns. I have been the chaplain at Lafayette College for 12 years. We did not do pronouns when I first came to Lafayette. And now you don't go to any event with students where they just reflexively say, I'm Alex, she, her, hers, I'm a religious studies major. They just say this. So if this is something that is new to you, I would encourage you to catch up because you will be hearing this everywhere. So let's just get out of the way that yes, this is the way we refer to someone in the third person. And I get it, I am such a grammar nerd. I feel you. I feel you. So the good news for you, and Brooke, I really appreciate this fact that Brooke found for us, the use of the singular they can be traced back as far as Chaucer.
You've been doing it your whole life, folks. When you don't know who a purse belongs to, somebody left their bag, we've been doing it our whole life. The only time that this is different is just when that is what someone prefers to always be used about them. And so it's hard, but we've got to practice this because it's a way to show that we love and care about somebody.
Absolutely. And so again, we don't want to assume someone's pronouns just by looking at them. So this is, you may have noticed that you were offered buttons. I learned yesterday that if you are attending APSE in January, you will also see these buttons. And that is really exciting that this is becoming part of just the way we do church and the way that we do our lives together. So this is a little plug for any of you who might be the name tag guru at your congregation. Think about adding pronouns to your church name tags. And again, I just want to talk about what Brooke said, the safe space. When someone hears you use your pronouns, that can be such an affirming experience to feel like this church welcomes me, this place wants me, this person is trying to get who I am. So it's just a little bit of effort.
Yeah. I would also add that when someone is in the process of transitioning or changing their expression of themselves, pronouns are going to be really important. It really shows that you see them, that you believe them, that what they're going through is valid. And so getting those pronouns, even if it's not what you see, is very, very important. It's also been linked to whether or not someone is going to develop a mental health condition. It is very serious. It is the thing that shows that you see them. And so this is very important. And I recommend practicing with yourself, practicing with people around you, that when you say that person's name, you're going to say he or you're going to say they, because it's that important. And there's grace. Like, people understand if you mess up, but the effort is what really matters.
And again, we have been messing up people's genders for a long time. This is not a new thing. My full name is Alexandra. I almost always go by Alex. When I walk into a congregation to do pulpit supply for the first time, sometimes folks are surprised to see me. Fine, that's absolutely fine. And so sometimes I'll get an email ahead of time from the office manager using a he pronoun for me. And when I write back, I just gently say, actually, I prefer she, her pronouns. It's fine. It's not a big deal. Just correct it and move on. I also want to note that sometimes you will hear folks say things like, I use he, they pronouns. So sometimes you're going to see those as well. And there are different, again, we are just using back to that slide before. There are a lot of different options. Sometimes Carla is here with us. You will hear her later. She often says, I have heard her say, she, ella, using E-L-L-A, the Spanish language pronoun. So again, there's lots of different ways this can be done.
I just wanted to say, again, with people who use different pronouns, as you said, he, they, sometimes you'll see another order, you'll see they, he. It typically means that you can use both, the first one being the one of priority, but the person is indicating that they want you to switch it up. They may be able to tell you specifically what that means for them. Maybe it's particular situations, maybe it's particular people, but switch them up in the way that people are asking you to. That just means I'm feeling a little bit fluid. I identify as a little bit fluid, and I want you to honor that. So if somebody gives you multiple pronouns to use all of them.
All right, we're getting really close to being done here. What words are not recommended? So these are some words. I'm not even going to say them out loud, but I'll let you go ahead and read them on the screen. But I think one of the other things that is really important is words that should not be used are words that people tell you they would like you to not use. Okay? So even though your next door neighbor's cousin says, I'm a cross-dresser, someone else might not want to use that terminology. So again, I think if there's anything that I hope one of the things to get out of this whole day is that we are respecting people. We are respecting their God-created selves, and they are the ones who get to say and choose and give you the information that applies to them. And again, I think it's okay. Sometimes we get a little nervous and we're not sure about asking. It's okay to ask. And in fact, someone might say to you, I don't want you to ask me that. You can take it. You can take it. You can take that, okay? Anything else you would like on this slide, Brooke?
I don't think so.
All right, really and truly, our last one.
Yeah.
Just do your best. If someone trusts you, really honor that. Part of again, the holiness that we all have is having conversation, having trust. And again, you are all brilliant, loving, smart people. You're going to say and do the wrong thing. I am going to say and do the wrong thing. Brooke is going to say and do the wrong thing. And the good news is what? We are all beloved of God, and we can repair, we can come to folks, we can apologize, and we can do better.
Yes, I would just add that this is a place of grace, and hopefully also our congregations are places of grace as well, and all of the places that we inhabit. There is grace. It's okay to mess up. You're going to mess up. As someone who spends a lot of time in queer communities, it takes a while to get to know everybody, right? And so you're going to mess up. There are times when I say someone's pronouns wrong. You just correct yourself. Thank you. Move on. You don't want to draw too much attention to it. You don't want to over-apologize, because then that makes the person feel uncomfortable, right? Just thank you. Correct yourself and move on. There is plenty of grace. People know the difference when you're messing up because you don't care, when you're messing up because you're trying. So just keep that in mind, and continue to ask questions throughout the day.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Well, I don't know how to get that on there. Okay. Thank you so much, Brooke and Alex. We're going to move into the panel conversation, the theme of this day. And the theme, as you might have seen on the flyer you picked up, hopefully, with the schedule, is making space for curiosity, authenticity, and community. When the planning team began talking about this day and what they wanted to convey, they wanted to recognize that all of us are in different spaces, different steps or stages of this journey toward being a church that is truly welcoming, a church that is truly inclusive, a church where there is indeed space. But all of us have room to grow. All of us have ways that we can be making more space. And they chose those words: curiosity, authenticity, community. I lived for many years as a pastor in Kansas City who was in the closet. And when I look back at those years, it's not that I wasn't doing ministry, it's not that there wasn't grace, but what was lost was that a lot of my life was not lived with authenticity. And I regret that. I long to replay those years where those relationships might have been different because of that. All of us, whether we are LGBTQIA+ or not, can live with greater curiosity, with greater authenticity, and more committed to community. And when we do, the spaces we make will be safer, more affirming, and filled with rich blessings for LGBTQIA+ people and for all of us. So today we're going to take a few minutes to talk about the stories of queer folks at different places with very different stories and backgrounds, but whose stories might help us think through our own and the spaces we're making. So I'm going to invite our three panelists to come on up here. I'm going to move these chairs just a little bit forward so we can all see you well. Thank you. I think we have enough microphones for all of you to have one.
We saved the spot of honor.
There you go, Charles. And I'm going to invite each of these panelists to tell a little of their stories, and then as time permits, they can engage with each other, and we may even have some time for questions. One of the things about this day is we've built in some time between things so that you can be connecting with each other. So we won't take you right up to the workshop start, but we are going to try to get some time with each of our guests. Let me start with Reverend Tim Rodden, who is a retired minister, member of Newcastle Presbytery, chaplain and director of LGBTQ health services. Tim, you've been in this presbytery a long time. You've been on this journey a long time. I wonder if you could share some reflections on your history here and how it speaks to this moment of trying to create space.
Thank you. Tim Rodden, I use the pronouns he, him. I have only ever been a member of Newcastle Presbytery. I'm a child of this presbytery. Can you hear me? Test a little closer. All right. I have to act like it's an ice cream cone or something. So anyway, I grew up at Red Clay Creek Presbyterian Church in the northern part of the presbytery, so I am really quite a child of this presbytery. The presbytery has a history of being known as a very open and affirming and welcoming presbytery, which it is. But it's been a struggle, and part of the history, I wanted to share a little bit of that history with you from my experience as a gay man. We all know that the Book of Order was changed to make it more inclusive in terms of sexual orientation and gender identity in 2011. But before that time, there were struggles within this presbytery. There's still struggles within this presbytery, not about polity, but back in the day during, I'll just call it the Amendment Wars, when various amendments were coming up, there was a group of us that very intentionally met to strategize how we were going to address that at a presbytery meeting. We were very organized. We took leading from Covenant Network of Presbyterians, from More Like Presbyterians, and we gathered before the presbytery meeting to figure out what our strategy was, because we lined up on either side of the aisles in terms of, we had 2 minutes to speak or 30 seconds to speak, whatever it was, so that we were prepared to address the issue at hand. One comment that just will, I think, sort of give light to some of the emotional content of those times. I'll never forget one person who was speaking against inclusion, talking about how it would be like cutting off the legs of Jesus Christ on the cross. So that's the type of emotional content that some of you that are here in this room may remember have being said. I certainly do as a gay man. And we all had intake of breath at the time that happened. But there's one particular time, I think, in this presbytery which was pivotal to me and for some other folks too, and the person I'm going to be talking about, I got their permission to talk about them, so I wasn't outing them, but it was very pivotal to me, and I think there was collateral trauma. I don't know if that's an appropriate term or not, but there's collateral trauma that occurred during that meeting of Presbytery. It happened at Westminster Presbyterian Church in Wilmington, the northern part of Westminster. We have a row back there of southern and the South Westminster and the North Westminster. It was on, the meeting was on June 8th in 2013. And I'll set the context politically. In Delaware, on May 7th, Governor Markell signed legislation for marriage equality in Delaware. The meeting of Presbytery happened 1 month after that, 1 month before it became legal on July 1st of that year for marriage equality for same-gender folks to be married. So that's the political context. The other context, which I just learned about this week in my conversation with Kai, was that the Out of Order documentary trailer, which was produced about queer clergy folks or people wanting to be ordained in the Presbyterian Church, the trailer came out, which I was not aware of at that point. Kai was, because they were featured in that trailer. Kai was coming up as a candidate ready to be ordained and become a minister member of this presbytery at that meeting. And I remember that meeting with vivid detail, more with vivid emotion because of the rancor that was expressed at that meeting. So I've been in touch with Kai because I wanted their permission to be able to share this with you. Kai is a person who was also a member of this presbytery, grew up at Concord Presbyterian Church, was being examined for ordination to become one of the pastors at head of Christiana Presbyterian Church. At this meeting, 17 members of the 100-member head of Christiana Church was there speaking highly in their favor. Kai told me in the last couple of weeks in our communication that they were aware that the trailer had come out and that they were featured in it and that there might be some vitriol expressed in the questioning of them at the presbytery meeting. I didn't know that, but they were prepared for that. I was not. So one of the questions that came up, and I sort of saw this as there were basically two bullies, as I would term them, that were asking these really invasive personal questions. And I think many of us there were just shocked because of the history of this presbytery that we were very open and affirming. And this sort of seemed to come out of the blue. One of the questions that was asked that Kai, they wrote 5 days after this a wonderful blog about this, and I can provide a link to this if you'd like. One of the questions was, tell us about your submission to the lordship of Jesus Christ in the area of sexuality. So that was the invasive question that was asked. Another one was talked about a pointed question about my integrity and biblical sexual ethics. And then they left the room for this to go on in terms of discussing whether or not they should be ordained or approved for ordination or not. I was livid. I turned to my husband, both of us, of course, he's gay too. Well, not of course, but he is gay. And I said to him, I said, I'm going to out us both now. We were the worst kept secret because we were both minister members of this presbytery. We lived out in the open. We hid nothing. We just didn't speak the word. I said, I didn't give him any choice. I can't sit here because I am just so mad. So I outed us both. He had 5 seconds warning. I did in my own way, ask his permission. He would agree with that. That's sort of the way our relationship goes. And I said, we have been among you for all these years. You know who we are. Is this really who we want to be as a presbytery? I also remember going up to the two bullies afterwards and just really blessing them out in the most Christian way that I could under the circumstances, being that we were in a very holy place. So one of the things in my conversation with Kai, who describes themselves as gay and trans, at that point, we were open as a denomination, technically, polity-wise, to LGBTQ. We hadn't added more letters then, and the T was basically silent back in the day. And it was not a safe place for Chi to talk about their gender identity. It was about their sexual orientation with some trepidation, I think, but prepared for that, and they were as eloquent as can be. Chi is still a minister member of this presbytery, is a visiting scholar at the Graduate Theological Union, is that what it's called, out in the Bay Area, I think. And we've been in touch and in conversation about this. One of the things I think that was really great to hear from Chi in this blog, actually it was in an email from them. My experience of the meeting was complicated, they say. I expected the invasive questions and challenging tone because that is what had been seen happen to my friends and colleagues when they were publicly queer at GA and other presbyteries. And that was why it took me as long as it did to even consider trying to be ordained in the PCUSA. So at the time, what stood out was most for me was the amount of positive support I also got, because that was an unexpected thing. They talked about how people came up to them and expressed their love and support for them during all of this. So there is that history within this presbytery, this very open and affirming presbytery, but there is that collateral trauma that is still lived within our body and within my body. Randy and I, he's now a minister member of Baltimore Presbytery, where he's doing an interim pastorate. That following September, we decided to reaffirm our marriage vows. We were married in California in 2008 when he was a commissioner from this presbytery to the GA there. 1 week after it became legal for same-gender couples to be married in California, before several months later it was not legal because they had some sort of ballot initiative. So we were one of 18,000 folks who were married during that time where we established our legal footprint. That September, after this meeting of Presbytery, Randy and I reaffirmed our marriage vows at First and Central Presbyterian Church. It was a wonderful celebration. Doug Gertz, Jenny Warren, Jim Mosley, Senator Chris Coons, a friend of ours that I grew up with at Red Clay, was the preacher that day. It was a great event. The choir sang, we had communion. There were about 20 to 30 clergy that were in attendance, and the church was full, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. But anyway, I just wanted to share a little bit about what this presbytery has been through, the history of this presbytery, and it's great that we've moved to where we are, because our executive staff have not always been as great in terms of inclusion as we have now. Folks in the past meant well, but felt, I think, that they were walking a tightrope. And by walking the tightrope and walking down the middle, did not come across as support. So thank you for everything that we have here today.
Thank you. Charles Gilmore, you came to Newcastle Presbytery in retirement, where I know you're now serving at Cool Spring Presbyterian Church. But you told me a couple weeks ago that you've been, as you put it, in and out of the closet for 25 years. I wonder if you could share a little of what that has meant. That means that you were doing that during a time when the Presbyterian Church said you couldn't be out and be a pastor. Talk about that experience, and particularly what that experience as a person of color in this majority white denomination.
Thank you for asking me to be part of this panel, and for asking me to share my experience as finally somebody who was able to claim and affirm his identity as a gay man. My pronouns, by the way, are he and him. It's very hard to talk about this because so much of it is acknowledging my own deceit. That it felt very safe for me to stay in the closet, and that's basically what I did for the majority of my ministry. I stayed so far in the closet that I went so far as to get married to a woman and to become adoptive parents of 2 children, thinking that if I stayed in that box long enough, it would fit, or I would fit into it and be able to be what I very clearly was not. And the higher power, let's just use that general term, decided that I was not going to be able to have an authentic ministry living in that way. And so higher power brought a man into my life with whom I fell in love very quickly and unexpectedly, and at first unhappily. Didn't want this to be happening, but couldn't seem to do anything about it. Like the brake pedal just wasn't there, it wasn't working. And so I had to finally acknowledge that this is who I was, and it meant leaving the church that I was serving at the time, Elmwood Presbyterian Church, East Orange, New Jersey. A wonderful church with a wonderful congregation, African American for the most part. But I couldn't be out there, and so I resigned that position and spent a good number of years trying to find what my ministry was and discern that ministry. I did CPE and then went into hospital chaplaincy, and that was much safer. I was more able to be out as a hospital chaplain to the staff. The patients generally didn't care one way or the other. That wasn't, that wasn't their concern at all. They were in the hospital, and that was, that was their issue. Why am I here? How can I get out? What's going to happen to me? So I had a very successful time of ministry as hospital chaplain, and then I was called to be the interim pastor of the Jan Hus Presbyterian Church in New York City. And to characterize that church very briefly and probably unfairly, Jan Hus is the congregation that was supposed to be in Greenwich Village, but it kind of got lost and ended up on the Upper East Side. And it was one of those mid-block churches that you see in Manhattan, I guess in a few other big cities. And the rest of the block was very expensive high-rises and condos and so forth. And the people who were our neighbors very much disliked the fact that Jan Hus had a strong ministry to homeless people, including a once-a-week dinner on Tuesday nights for the homeless. And we had this situation where we could have everybody there for dinner, and we had to tell them, as soon as you finished eating, you need to leave because the neighbors will complain if there's any noise or any dirt or any sign that you're there. So it was awkward, but it worked, and I was able to be out at Jan Hus. And I took a deep breath and told him during the interview, well, I'm a gay man, and the response was, half the people sitting here interviewing you are also gay. So that was the end of that, or the beginning of it, I should say. But at some point, the interim pastor needs to step aside for the full-time called and installed pastor, and that happened. So I then went back to serving churches where I wasn't speaking about my sexuality, and finally ended up being pastor of 2 small churches in Englewood, New Jersey. Again, not out, not saying who I was, just, the church was in New Jersey, I lived in Queens, so, there's a whole river and state line between what I was doing and the way I was living, so that all kind of worked out pretty well. My husband and I got to be 70, and New York City was too expensive, too crowded, too noisy, too dirty. Did I say expensive already? And we just said we need to relocate, and we wanted to live in an area that was LGBT friendly and welcoming. So we landed on Rehoboth Beach, New Jersey. But just like wanting to go to Fire Island, we couldn't afford the Pines, so we were in Cherry Grove. We moved to Delaware, couldn't afford Rehoboth Beach, so we ended up being 20 miles north of Rehoboth. But there is a large and affirming gay community, LGBTQIA, et cetera, community, and we have become a part of that. In retirement, I worked as a chaplain again for a hospice, and again, the chaplain's sexuality is not an issue when you're talking with people who are facing death, so it was simply not mentioned. I'm very good at not mentioning it. And Then I started getting invitations to do some pulpit supply, which was great. And one of the churches that kept inviting me back was a little church named Cool Spring on Log Cabin Hill Road. I couldn't think of a more country-sounding name if I tried. But this little church of elderly white people just completely welcomed me. I saw that there were several gay men who were already involved in the church, and they were very happy and felt completely accepted. And so when I came to preach there, I started bringing my husband with me and identified us as a couple and him as my husband. And nobody seemed to as much as bat an eye. And I thought, well, that's really remarkable. So the church has continued to be welcoming, and when I got laid off from the chaplaincy position with the hospice company, I told them the following Sunday, because we were at that point where I could say, please pray for my son, please pray for my daughter, and I could put my prayer request in with the others, and people were, okay, sure, glad to. And so I told them, I'd like to ask for your prayers today, because I just got laid off from my chaplaincy job. And one of the church members, I can still hear his voice saying, you know you got a job here. Full stop. I mean, you know, I just, what, you know? And I thought I was hearing God's voice telling me something, so I thought I better pay attention. Presbyterians don't do that, as all of you know. That's why you laughed when I said it. We can barely get folks to say amen out loud, much less a full sentence. But that full sentence was just like the door finally swung all the way open and said, you know, you can be here, you can serve this church, and you can be who you are while you're doing it. In fact, it's essential that you be who you are while you're doing it. And so in December of 2021, I was called as the part-time pastor at Cool Spring Presbyterian Church, and in the beginning of next month, I will have completed 2 years serving there. So, and we are renewing my contract on a 6-month basis because I'm old. And, you know, my health right now is great. Who knows? You know, you never know what's going to happen, especially when you reach 80. And so I got to, you know, I'm trying to be aware of my limitations and also aware, more importantly, of what God is asking us to do together. So that's basically what my journey is. I will end with a story. When I moved down here, I had, of course, had to find all new medical people to care for me. And one of those doctors said to me, well, I moved here not long ago. I have 2 pieces of advice for you. I said, what? He said, you're going to have to buy a truck. So I said, do I have to put a gun rack on it? He said, probably, but you want to buy the gun. Just and the second piece of advice, he said, and don't ever forget this, don't ever say anything bad about anyone around here because they all know each other, which is true. So, but I've been very blessed to be able to have this kind of experience. I never saw it coming, never thought it would happen. And to be in a situation like this where we're talking about how the church can become more welcoming and more inclusive of LGBT people, as I've said to a couple of folks already today, it was just inconceivable in 1969 when I was ordained that this meeting would happen, that these conversations would be taking place, that I could sit up in front of all of you, in front of God and everybody and say, yes, I'm a gay man, I'm thankful about it blindly, and happy to be who God created me to be. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
You know, they do release you. They release you from those contracts, Charles, if it doesn't. Yeah. Slat's tool. So it was 5 years ago. I was realizing that the General Assembly passed this resolution that affirmed the dignity and humanity of transgender and non-binary people, and that was the first word the General Assembly had said about transgender and non-binary people 5 years ago. But that was after you graduated from seminary, Slats, and you have spent much of the time since you graduated from seminary speaking in congregations and churches around the country, to gatherings of Presbyterians, and hearing stories of others in the trans and non-binary community. And I wonder if you could share a little about that experience. We've heard from 2 gay men, 3 gay men now. But tell us that, a little more of what we need to know about those stories.
Absolutely. So I'm still slats. And some of the words, just to give you some sense of some of the words that you can use for me, I identify as transgender. I also identify as non-binary, so I have a gender identity that is neither male nor female, and that's about as much language as I put around that. I grew up having been named a name that literally means girl. And always struggled with that and didn't have the language for a long time as to why. And so when I started getting this language around gender identity where it didn't have to be male or female, I was like, oh, well, that makes sense. I wish I'd known that 20 years ago. But I also use the word queer to define myself. I won't put that word on anyone else because I know a lot of us have a very complicated relationship with that, but I love it. So you can feel free to use that for me. And I am attracted to people of all genders. So yeah, it's a big pool of slightly undefined gender sexuality stuff. And I have never been in a church that has been fully ready to accept me for all of who I am the moment I've stepped through the door. And I have not been trying for the churches that I know won't. I know there's churches where it's like, nope, they do not want me there, and I don't really want to be there. So I am drawn towards churches that are going to have things like welcoming statements or are members of Covenant Network or More Light. And still, and I remember having a conversation with you, Brian, when we first talked about me coming onto the board, of experiences that I've had in churches that say, yes, we are fully open and affirming and accepting, and struggling in those churches. And I would say that that is a pretty universal experience for folks of gender identities that are outside this cisgender paradigm. Now, I'm also Presbyterian, and I was not originally Presbyterian, so I'm a very enthusiastically Presbyterian now. And one of the things that has drawn me, obviously it was predestined, but one of the things that has drawn me towards the Presbyterian tradition, the Reformed tradition, is this acknowledgement that we will all mess up. That is a fact, and there is grace, and I know that there are many ways in other areas where I mess up and need that grace. And so I think the thing I would really like to share is 2 different experiences, both in the same church, actually, of when people have messed up and done a really good job at it, and when people have messed up and fallen short of the opportunity that we have. So I'll start with the more negative one, right? Because that's how we like narratives to go. So I'd been away from this church for a while. I'd come out as non-binary. Everyone knew. It was no secret. I knew most of the staff of this church. Covenant Network Church. And I came back, and every week during the assurance of pardon, the liturgy was, "Sisters and brothers, you are forgiven." If there's one part of the worship service I would really love to be included in, it is the assurance of pardon. I'm not sure if anyone else here feels that way, but just personally. It is, in fact, very easy to say, "Sisters, brothers, and all siblings in Christ." Or use some other language that does not have familiar gender. Sometimes I think that we rely too much on familial language and it becomes kind of a default and loses its meaning, and then there's a whole other conversation about how our liturgy reflects where we are in the worship service. But also very easy to make a very small fix to include everyone, including in ways that specifically lift up women, because let's be honest, as a church, we have not reached equity there yet either. And I showed up, and as often happens, I was singing in the choir, and a lot of people in the choir were like, oh, this is... Because it's more obvious when someone's in the room, right? And the next week didn't change. The next week didn't change. I then knew that some of the people I was closer to on staff were bringing it up in staff meetings. Didn't change. And I finally went up to the pastor who I knew who was responsible for the liturgy, and I said, look, I am really struggling because I am consistently not a part of this really important part of the worship service. And they said, we know it's not right. It's going to change when we go into Advent. Now, I went to seminary, and I am a liturgical nerd, and I know that if you would like to slip a change into your worship service without people questioning why, you do it at the change of a liturgical season. It makes perfect sense that the liturgy would change as we go into Advent. It's Advent, it's very exciting. And I knew then that they were not willing to have the conversation, the potential conversation, if somebody asked, why did this change? They were not willing to say, you know what? We realized that this was not doing what we wanted it to do. And we realized that there are people in this church, and even if they didn't know that there was someone in this church, there could be people in the church for whom that doesn't actually include. And so we changed it. They weren't willing to have that conversation. And that was deeply disappointing. And affected my level of trust that I was going to place in that community. Now, again, same church. I was singing in the choir, and I got a call from the choir director on Saturday evening, which if you get a call from your choir director at Saturday evening, you know there is a problem. And so I picked up, and they said, I am calling to warn you and apologize, because as I was reviewing the bulletin for Sunday, I realized that we have a hymn that has many verses, and we have split up the congregational singing by women and children and men. Now, I do appreciate that they did women and children, because children often get completely left out of this conversation. But this idea of having the higher voices and the lower voices singing was presented in a way that had to do with gender. And they said, I wanted you to know before you came into church so that it didn't catch you off guard. And I wanted to say that I am sorry, and I should have caught that earlier. And I'm going to do my best to make sure that does not happen again. And then they said, now I can do my own research on this, but I also know that you literally teach workshops on this. So if you have suggestions of better language to use, which actually I first encountered higher voices and lower voices when I was working at Montreat Conference Center, because they do high school youth conferences. And you cannot tell what voice part high school boys are going to be able to sing at any moment of the day. So that's where I learned higher and lower voices. So it's one of those things that actually benefits many, many communities, not just us. And I came into worship, and I sang in whatever octave I was expected to be singing in at that moment. And I was able to engage, even though it wasn't an ideal situation for me, because I knew that it had become a learning experience, and that I was being considered and taken care of, and that then increased my trust. I am still on that choir's mailing list, even though I live halfway across the country. And so those have been deeply formative kinds of experiences for me, not only as a trans individual, but as somebody who seeks to be full of justice in my daily life. We will all fall short. I have fallen short plenty of times. And what we have in our traditions, I think, is this opportunity to acknowledge that and say there are ways that we can grow and learn even from this, and it's only with that kind of work that we're going to be able to get to the point where everyone does feel welcome in our churches. So that's the story I'll share.
So something you're going to hear a lot today is that this is not the end of the conversation. This is the beginning of a conversation. And so while this is going to be the end of this plenary session, Tim, Charles, Slats will be here all day. And I hope you'll seek them out for conversation and inquiry and curiosity and community. Let's thank them one more time. So we're going to shift the... About workshop what? Okay, so we're going to shift the schedule. Come on up, Mark. We're going to shift the schedule to start the workshop number 1 at 11:15 instead of 11, so you have a little time to connect. It will go till 12:15. It will be 1 hour long, just as it was scheduled. It'll just go till 12:15, and then we'll have lunch. We're going to talk about the workshops here in a moment, but Mark has an announcement.
Yes, for workshops, if you are going to a workshop in the sanctuary, you've arrived. If you are going to a workshop in the social hall, that's where you registered today. If you are going to a workshop in the assembly room or in the library, that's 1 floor up. Our elevator is over here. It's cramped, it's small, but it will do the trick. There are also stairs. You do not need to go to the 3rd floor except for something that you're going to talk about in a minute with Lynn.
Yes.
And that'll be in the choir room. So
great.
It's either this floor in the sanctuary, downstairs in the social hall, or up 1 floor for the assembly room and the library.
So those workshops are listed here. Does everyone get one of these? If you did not, I think there's still some on the registration table. Do you actually have them? Vince has them. If you need one, raise your hand and Vince will bring it to you. Thank you, Vince. These are listings of all the workshops today. Let me say a quick word about the workshops. There's something I want to point out. The workshop called How Welcoming Are We Really? Conducting a welcoming inventory of our worship, community, and physical space, being led by Brooke Scott, is being offered in both sessions. So if you see one other workshop, if you want to go to that one and one other workshop, find that other workshop, make sure you go to it in the session when it is being offered, and come hear Brooke's workshop in the other session. But you're welcome to go to any session, regardless of what you signed up for ahead of time. We tried to arrange them. We looked at your choices. We tried to arrange them in a way that you could maximally go to the things you wanted to go to. I know that we couldn't honor everyone's possibilities, and I'm sorry about that. But we tried to balance them as best we could. So your choices in this first session that starts at 11:15 are How Welcoming Are We Really? With Brooke in the sanctuary right here. Also, for those of you viewing online, welcome. We're glad you're here. That's the one that will be streamed at 11:15. Queer Intersections in Matthew 25, taught by Cindy Coleman, will be in the social hall downstairs. Spiritual Formation for Queer Christians, taught by Mark, will be in the assembly room upstairs. And Ministry with Aging, LGBTQIA+ folks, taught by Charles and by Jay Somerville, will be in the library upstairs. You can see the listings. I won't read them all to you, but the second session of workshops are listed there. And we hope you'll choose which ones fit your interests best. I do want to mention that if you are feeling unsettled, if you're feeling like you want to talk to someone about something you're hearing, something you're feeling, something you're experiencing, we do have a conference chaplain available, Reverend Len Hedges-Gettle. Len, where are you? So they can see what you look like. There he is. We'll be up on the third floor, as Mark said, in the choir room, and just hanging out and available to talk if that's something that you want. We will let Len come and have lunch and things, so you may see him at other times. I do want to make one other announcement. Speaking of food, we do have a participant in the conference who has a severe peanut and tree nut allergy. I mean, a very serious allergy that is life and death. So it would be very important that if you might have brought in some snacks, or maybe you have like a almond milk or something in a coffee, to not have that open inside the church. So please avoid opening anything with nuts, tree nuts, peanuts in the church. And the food today has all been cleared, is appropriate for the day. That food, by the way, is provided by the Wilmington Kitchen Collective. I have enjoyed learning about the Wilmington Kitchen Collective and the ministry that it shares with congregations of this presbytery, and it's exciting, and I'm sure we'll get to hear a little more about that later. Are there any other announcements? I want to talk about one last thing in the schedule, since we won't be together again until the end of the day. At 2:45, you'll see in the schedule, it says discussions by congregation or topical groups. This is, the purpose of these events is to make connections with each other. And so we didn't want to schedule you so tightly that you didn't have the opportunity to do that. That time is set aside for you to gather with the people that through the day you've decided you need to have a little bit more conversation with. It could be if there's a group of you who came from the same congregation and you want to talk about next steps that you need to take in your church, that's great. If there's a group from another church that's doing something you want to do, carve out 10 minutes with them and talk about it there. Maybe you've connected with someone in a workshop. Use that time how you want to connect. If you don't have any other plans and you want to just see who wants to connect and talk about what they're learning in the day, I'll be here in the sanctuary, and we can meet at 2:45. We will all come to the sanctuary for closing worship at 3:15. Questions? Ready? Take a break. Workshop starts at 11:15. Sudi, how are you?
Hello, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Welcome. I am going to be running over here so that I can move through these slides. But welcome everybody to the workshop, How Welcoming Are We Really? And so there was a lot of interest in this workshop, which is why we're going to offer it twice today. I think that this is a good place for everybody to kind of start. When we hear all of these 101 terminology, what words do we use? A lot of times what we walk away with is, now what? What do we do? How do we show people that we care about things? How do we show people that we are learning and growing and wanting to love them the way that they are asking us to love them? So we're going to walk through what welcome is, and we're also going to talk about very specific ways that you can show welcome in your congregation. We're going to talk about everything from the building itself to leadership to worship to inclusive language and what that is. And you'll also have the opportunity to ask some questions at the end as well. So the first place where I want to start is actually just getting to know what's on your mind when you hear welcome. So what are some of the images or feelings or words that come up when you hear the word welcome? Open arms. Community, open arms. Sorry. Relax. Safe space. Smiling. Inclusive.
I would have to say a relative term.
A relative term.
Depending on where you are and who's saying it.
Yes. We might define welcome differently depending on who we are. Any other, what about emotions? Yeah. That they're glad you're there, yeah. I'm here for you. Definitely, definitely. Any other words or images? Caring. Come join us. Enthusiasm is the word I think of when I heard that. Hospitality. Extending a hand or arm. Open heart. Awesome. Any other images? Yeah, Judy. I love that. I love that, breaking the word down. Great. Well, I want you to keep these things in mind as we move through. All of those words, I think, encompass welcome in different ways. And what I want you to really think about is how can we create that feeling for those who are not like us, who may be like us, in our churches, in every part of the church. And so, to supplement your definitions, we're going to take it to Webster Dictionary and dictionary.com. I was really interested actually at what would come up. And so some of the things are to greet hospitably, with courtesy, to accept with pleasure, to receive with gladness and delight. These are all like really intense, juicy words. To delight in one's presence or companionship, to regard as pleasant and good, to be pleased about and encourage or support. These are all, again, really, really specific words that I hadn't even really thought of myself. Synonyms being to embrace, to enjoy someone or some group of people, to choose a group of people, to really show that hospitality is one word that came up. And so sometimes I think we hear words so often that we don't really think about things like this. To accept with pleasure, to regard as good, to be delighted in, all of those kinds of things are really this full feeling of we're not just inviting you in, but we're actually excited and created this place with you in mind. And so that's kind of really what we're getting at. Because we are Presbyterians, many of us, I also thought it was important to ground the conversation of welcome in Scripture. And so there were some things, verses, passages that I thought of as really exemplifying what welcome is. And so Romans, where we are told to welcome one another, just as we have been welcomed. There is also this famous passage about showing hospitality to the stranger, to the people we don't know, because the scripture actually tells us that we might accidentally be engaging angels when we welcome people into our doors that we don't know. And then, of course, Matthew 25, you've heard so many times that it's probably annoying at this point. But Matthew 25 ends with the king in the parable telling people, just as you did it to one of the least of these, you did it to me. And so that means that everything that we do for one another, everything we neglect to do to one another, Jesus takes that really personally, as if it were him. And so that's also something to keep in mind as we move through this. Of course, Luke, I have the Message translation here, but of course, Luke is one of those gospels that really wraps its arms around all of the people that we're supposed to remember when we're planning a banquet, when we're planning a church service, when we're planning any kind of exciting event, anything that we say we're doing in Christ's name. We should welcome not just our friends and family, but people who never get invited, people who are misfits from the wrong side of the tracks, people who have been neglected and even harmed by institutions like ours. And so these are some of the scriptures that I've been meditating on as I've been thinking about welcome and what I wanted to share with you today. And so we'll talk a little bit more later about what that really looks like. We're also going to talk about why does welcome matter? Something that I don't think that many people realize is that many people in the LGBTQ community are actually still affiliated with some kind of religion. I think that because so much harm has been done and so many people have horror stories of being thrown out of churches or judged in churches, we think that that means that they don't care about it anymore. And research actually shows the opposite, that while there are many people who do walk away, there's at least half of them who still find a lot of joy and comfort, at least in the thought of God, or at least in being affiliated with a religion, even if they don't actively attend or can't find a place to go. And so there's this whole opportunity for us to really reach people who are still longing and still hungry to connect with God and to connect with a community of faith, at least half. And sometimes I think we focus so much on the other half that we forget the people who would still be willing if that welcome was there. And so that's important for us to recognize that there are many, many religious people in the LGBTQ community and many who would be open to our churches if they also could be welcomed. Fun fact that I also found is that older LGBTQ people, middle age, Black adults, and those living in the South are most likely to be religious. Black communities are very, very spiritual people, so that is not surprising. The same is true of other groups of color, but these are also some of the people that, they may have faced rejection, but are not necessarily ready to walk out. And so we have to really figure out how do we be places where they can come. Why does welcome matter from a psychological perspective? I've had the opportunity to receive training in social work and mental health, and so that's something that I bring. Something that I'm always thinking about is how mental health is affected by what we do in church and what we say. I try to be really intentional with the words that I use because the research also shows that it has a direct effect on how people think of themselves and how they move through the world. These are just some general statistics. Most of them are at least half or more than half of people who have experienced things like bullying, abuse, violence. Most of the people you meet in the LGBTQ community have had at least an experience happen to them or that they've witnessed of somebody else, of homophobia, of transphobia, whether it's in school, whether it's in sports, when it's in church. And so that is something that is almost assumed. It's not if, but when did you experience rejection? And so that's important for us to move through when we're thinking about a community that we want to come to our church. Is there's going to be some baggage. There's going to be some pastoral care that we have to do. And pastoral care isn't just the type of thing you do when you visit somebody at the hospital or you meet with them at their home. It's also what we do when we stand in front of a microphone, is taking care of people and being intentional about what we say and do. And so some more statistics. LGB, lesbian, gay, and bisexual adults are more than twice as likely to experience a mental health condition. And those can range anywhere from depression, anxiety, oftentimes PTSD. And then trans individuals, that T, are nearly 4 times as likely as cisgender individuals. And cisgender individuals are the opposite of trans, those whose identity does match what they were assigned at birth. So trans people are nearly 4 times in danger of struggling in their emotional and mental health life, oftentimes because of what they encounter in life, in church, in society. And 48% of trans adults have considered suicide. At this point, I would say that that's probably more than 48. Just from personal conversations, I think it's way more. I think that it is to the point where when you meet somebody, you have to assume that at some point they have considered suicide or experienced suicidal ideation. And we should take that personally. We really should. We should figure out, not just in church, but in how we live and advocate, how we can interrupt that cycle. And so we also know that one of the things that is tied to mental wellness is acceptance. Social, personal, spiritual acceptance is one of the things that impacts mental health and personal safety. So not only how that person feels about themselves, but actually keeps them safe from violence, from hate crimes. We know that that's on the rise. Hate crimes and anti-LGBTQ legislation is on the rise. There have been hundreds of bills drafted in the last couple years against these individuals, which has exacerbated these statistics, making it more than half. And so again, we need to take it personally. Discrimination and intolerance of any kind is very, very clearly connected to high rates of psychiatric disorders, substance use, hate crimes, homelessness, and suicide. These are all things that are very, very high in the LGBTQ community, and even higher for those in the trans community. And so I say that not to depress you, but to give you a realistic picture of what we're talking about, something that really can be life or death for people. And I would say that because half of the community does leave the church sometimes, if somebody does come to your door, it means that they may be giving it one more chance. And so what we're dealing with really is something that is serious, that can be life or death, and it's important to name it as that. It doesn't mean that it will always happen, that it will always be negative, but it means that this is an incredibly vulnerable population. But we have this opportunity to be ministry to this population as well. And so let's talk about some of the things that welcome is not. So I have a number of things here that I think that we struggle with sometimes, have this funny little every corporation in June hello, I like money. We see that. And so there are all these ways that we talk about welcome, and we try and do these different things that we think is helpful, but really aren't helpful. And so I've tried to name some of them. What is not welcoming for a church to do, for a community of people to do, is to be neutral, to not stand up and say that they support individuals, hoping that people will change eventually. Like, if we bring them in, maybe they'll get it, you know? Using someone's identity for your own gain. So sometimes proximity to people makes us feel good about ourselves. Or, for example, like every corporation in June, we can make money if we say that we support LGBTQ people, right? There are hardly any banks that I've been to that I really feel like are thinking about LGBTQ issues, but every bank is rainbow in June, right? Like, are you actually caring about your LGBTQ employees, or is it a way to make money? So using people is also not real welcome. Simply letting people in the door, simply letting people participate is also not welcome. Ignoring or pretending that differences do not exist, language such as "we are all the same," is also not welcoming. We're not all the same. I do not look like many of you in the room. I do not think like many of you in the room, and that's not something to ignore. That's something to celebrate. It's like, look what God also can do. Look at all of the ways that God's presence and power is manifest in all of these different bodies, all of these different ways of thinking, all these different identities that God is reflected in. So you don't want to ignore or pretend that we're the same, because we're not, and we're not meant to be. Making people guess. I've heard from a lot of people that go to church and they're like, I can't tell if I am accepted there. And a lot of people have fear because they know that if they join and they get close to people, that they could get their heart broken. And so they don't want to even take the risk because they can't tell. They're like, I went to their website. I can't really tell if I would be accepted there. I can't really tell if my family would be accepted there. I don't really see any families in the pictures that look like mine, so I don't really know. We don't want to make people guess. We want to be really clear. Avoiding hard conversations. Slats gave a beautiful example of this earlier, of the conversations that do and don't happen in church. When somebody is being excluded or somebody is potentially being harmed, and we don't talk about that because we don't want to make others uncomfortable, that's not welcome. We have to have people who say, we should change the bulletin because there are people who aren't included. We have to be willing to maybe make someone upset because of what they're used to hearing and saying in prayers so that someone else can feel welcome. We have to be willing to do that. Telling other people what's best for them is also not welcome. So when you're like, I wish that they would just change that little singular they thing, it doesn't really make grammatic sense to me. They should come up with something else. That's telling somebody what's best for them, right? Because it's not about us, it's about them. It's about what really feels like home to them. And they're telling you how they want to be loved. And so doing that and changing ourselves rather than them is the goal. Thinking we've acquired all there is to know. That's also easy for us to do. A lot of our churches that are in Covenant Network or More Light Presbyterians, our other LGBTQ organization, a lot of those churches have been members for years and years and years. And it's great, And I also worry sometimes that after a while, terms change, things change, the times change, and people stop learning. They stop feeling like there are things that they don't know. And so part of welcome is being dedicated to knowing what the latest terminology is, knowing what the latest research is, and bringing that into church so that we can keep up with the times, not in a way to put pressure on ourselves or judge one another, but because these things change every couple of years. Since most of these things I didn't learn in school, and I'm pretty young, but I didn't learn a lot of this stuff. It's changed even in the last 5 years. So making sure that we're always committed to lifelong learning. So this is also kind of depressing, this slide here. So let's talk about what welcome really is, to bring some light to the situation. What is true welcome? Celebrating uniqueness, right? Not pretending that I am the same as you, but celebrating all of the ways that I am unique and particular, and that God also is reflected through that. Centering the margins is welcome, where it's not just about everyone being in the space, but they're actually centered and prioritized. Clear and undeniable intentions, not making people guess, right? Like making it clear, making it visible. Letting people tell their own stories. We also talked about outing earlier. And the reason why outing is really bad is because we want to give people agency. We want, when someone is invited in to know a little bit more about you, we want that to be on their terms. And we want them to be able to tell their own stories. So we never want to do that for somebody. And so letting people tell their own stories is a part of welcome. Granting power and leadership. So not just having people who are LGBTQ in the church, but actually giving them the ability to make decisions, giving them the ability to have a role over other people so that they can influence what's happening, making sure that they're on your board, on your session, perhaps even leading worship from time to time, really letting them have power and not telling them what to do, but sometimes letting them lead others. Creating with the other in mind. And so changing our practices and our way of doing things. Again, going back to the bulletin, letting people who we say that we care about actually change the way we do things. That's a way of showing that we love them. It's really difficult to shift things like saying brothers and sisters in worship, but we can do it. We can do it because we love people, and that's why. Because when the Bible was written, we didn't have all of these different ways of talking about people, and now we do, right? And so now we can change ourselves instead of making them change. Understanding that people are not a monolith, obviously getting to know each person individually, because we know that you can't know everything about somebody just by knowing an acronym. You have to get to know their story. A willingness to be corrected. Sometimes when I'm talking to churches, they really struggle with being told that they're making a mistake or that they made a mistake. It can be really hard to hear, and yet part of love is that willingness to be corrected. Addressing harm is also a way of creating welcome. I'm going to go back to that example again of the bulletin. But addressing the feeling that someone might have of being invisible, or addressing somebody in your congregation who is saying something that's offensive, or dealing with a conflict. Those are all things that we have to be committed to, because sometimes welcome makes us feel like we don't want to disappoint anybody, we don't want to upset anybody, and it can make us really kind of passive and scared to address things. But once you've done all the things above, when you've centered the margins and you've made your intentions clear, then you can use that to say, hey, you're hurting somebody that we say that we care about. Here's how you can say that different, or here's how we can reach out. Fierce advocacy. So advocacy can be interpersonal in that situation I was just naming, where you're pulling somebody aside and saying, hey, you should do this, or this person misunderstood you, you should address that with them. But advocacy can also be about these systems that are seeking to harm our siblings in Christ. Across the country, again, there's been hundreds and hundreds of anti-LGBTQ bills that are drafted, some that have gone through. It's important for us to know which ones are affecting our local communities as well as national communities. Most of these bills are directed at trans individuals as well as those who participate in drag because they don't know the difference. And so it's very important for us to know what's affecting our community so that maybe a church leader or a church member can go to some of these rallies and really make a difference. And then I end with a transformed understanding of God and the world, as well as lifelong learning. I kind of put those together. That instead of seeing all of these things and new information as a burden, we really see it as an opportunity to grow and to see God in a new way. It was really powerful for me to realize God is actually much bigger than I thought God was. And that was exciting. Like, that deepened my worship because I was like, the God who is beyond gender, the God who created all of these amazing differences in people, like, that deepened my worship. And I think that it should transform us in that way, to not see it as something that's too difficult, but something that gives us this opportunity to see God in a new way. And then, of course, I put in 1 Corinthians, where the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. And so really seeing our siblings as people who make us complete. We can't be church without you. Like, we need to have that kind of mindset. Like, we can't be ourselves if you're not here. Like, we need the full spectrum of God's creation to worship, for it really to be worship. So how do we do this? There's a couple of things that I lay out here. One of the first things that we can do is to do an honest assessment of your congregation. Having those hard conversations, figuring out where people really stand, gathering up a team, and then making a plan. Now, any number of those steps could take a long time, especially churches where maybe you've never had the conversation. Maybe you had the conversation 15 years ago and nobody's brought it up since. Like, really resurrecting those conversations around welcoming LGBTQ people. And doing an honest assessment, because you don't want to do something that's disingenuous or untrue. Like, maybe you yourself want to be accepting, but if you did an honest assessment, you knew that your church wasn't ready yet, you don't want to say that you are, if that's really not true. Or you don't want to say, the church is accepting, but really you mean you are. You don't want to create a situation where somebody's deceived. So do a really honest assessment. Have those hard conversations. Build some partners. Get some allies with you and make a team. Don't do it on your own. Seek out education and support. Join a network like Covenant Network or More Light, who it's their job to give resources and to help walk you through the steps of how to do this. It's also their job to support you, give you ideas, let you know what LGBTQ people broadly might be looking for. And then again, don't rush, because people will sense, again, anything that's disingenuous. They will sense anything that's superficial. You don't want to join a network, again, and it not actually be real and reflective of the congregation. So take your time. If it takes a couple years to really get it to be true, that's better than rushing and then having somebody come in and it's not what they thought it would be. So those are some first steps. Welcome in the building. One of the things that you can do is proclaim your welcome visibly and clearly. Make it really easy to find. Use really explicit language. I name things like website, bulletin, the walls, publications, anything that you use, making your welcome really clear in those. Because again, people are looking for them. And people who aren't willing to risk having their heart broken aren't going to go into churches where there aren't already symbols that signal that there might be a welcome. And so that's why it's important to be visible. It is a hard step. It's not something that everyone can do, but it is nevertheless important because folks who are looking for churches are going to be looking for them. They know what symbols to look for. They know what language to look for, which is why it's also important to use explicit language. So you don't want to just say, "We welcome all," because nobody really does that. You don't want to say anyone regardless of, et cetera, et cetera. You want to actually take the time to name maybe sexual orientation, gender identity. You can even list them if you want, but it's important to name them because unless you do, people are gonna guess. People are gonna feel like they have to guess, what does that really mean? Who does that really include? One of the things that they did at Church on Main was that they had a mission statement, but then they also had another statement that made it even clearer what that means. So it was like named in the mission statement and like, to clarify, here is what we mean by that. And so you don't have to do that, but just any way that you can make it very specific. This is who we're talking about. This is who we created this in mind for. And so you want to play with your welcome statement, mission statement, vision statement. Edit your marriage policies. Like, you don't want people to say, "Oh, they're Presbyterian, so probably I can get married there." You want to put it in there. You can make it gender neutral. You can just say, a couple who comes in, so that there's some level of people not having to ask you out to coffee so that they can know what you're talking about. Sharing pronouns is something that we can also do. So some of us have name tags or emails where people are being introduced or where our names are. It is a good practice to start putting pronouns on those things, just because people may come in and you might think that you know what pronouns they should use. But again, you can't know for sure. There are some people who are very clearly androgynous, and then there are people who you think you know and you really don't. And so it's just becoming good practice to put pronouns in any place where your name would be, so that folks know, okay, they're taking more steps to welcome me, and they don't want to make assumptions about me. Gender neutral bathrooms. This is a hard one, but this is also a way to show welcome. Now, it doesn't have to be as complicated as you think. A lot of churches have gender neutral bathrooms, but they've never called it that. If you just have single stalls and anyone can use them, that's a gender neutral bathroom. You have them in your house. Like, it's just a stall and one person goes in at a time. Like, you've had them in your house your whole life, right? So it doesn't have to be complicated, but we want to start taking away the gender part of it, right? So you don't want to have men and women knowing that there aren't just men and women in the world. And so we want to take some of those signs down. You can make them family restrooms, put them all with a changing pad and things. But just making as many single stalls as we can, and just letting people know that they don't have to be bothered in the bathroom, and that whoever they are can use the same bathroom. That's a really, really good way to let people know that you recognize that they exist. And like I said, a lot of churches have them without knowing. They might not have a sign on it that says, all gender or every gender, but even if you just put restroom, that makes it a gender-neutral bathroom. So that's one of the things. And then I talked about flags and symbols. Again, those aren't to be, what I always hear is political. It's what I always hear is we don't want to be too political. And there's a couple things I might say to that. I think Jesus was political sometimes, but also, it doesn't have to be that. Like, it can just be, this is how we show people that they'll be welcome here. Because we know that historically it hasn't been. And so we know that people are going to be driving around looking for this. If they are willing to give a church the time of day, then this might be one of the ways that they come in. Welcome in worship and leadership. There are a couple of ways to do this. Inviting LGBTQ people into roles of authority and influence. How many LGBTQ people do you have on staff? How many of them lead in worship? How many of them are in your session? All those kinds of things are very important as a goal to get to. Making LGBTQ families and concerns a part of worship. So when you do hear about those really, really mean bills that are coming up, naming those in worship, naming them as things for us to confess, for us to grieve over, for us to take action on. Naming LGBTQ families as a part of people that are in the community of God. Changing our language to not just be about nuclear families, but about all types of families is one way that we can show welcome. There are also many gender-bendy type people in the Bible. And so preaching about them and being honest about them and the scholarship that's been written about them is also a way to show welcome, because there's so many ways to read stories, but there's a lot of queer people in the Bible, just saying. Consult LGBTQ scholarship and resources when crafting worship. And so making queer theologians a part of your weekly study is a really helpful way to think of stories in a new way. Another thing that you can do is offer rituals and ceremonies, particularly for folks who are transitioning. This is not something that happens too often, but something that could happen is someone who you knew as one name, one pronoun, who is transitioning to another gender identity. They may ask you to honor that, to mark it as a milestone. And that's one way that we can show welcome is, how do we have, as a part of our worship, a celebration of this person as a beloved child of God with their new name and their new pronouns, and we celebrate it as part of our service. That's something to consider, and you wouldn't have to do from scratch because people have done it before, and that's a way to really show that welcome as well. Inclusive language in song and liturgy. This is something that I'm going to talk about more in depth in a second, but a lot of our hymns, a lot of our liturgy is not inclusive inherently. And so a lot of it is going to use binary language. It's going to say men and women. It's going to say brothers and sisters. And we just got to get rid of that, like we just do, because it's not that what comes after that isn't true. It's just that's not where we are. That's not who we're talking about anymore. And so we have to change our language in as many ways as we can. We can sing the same tune, we can sing the same chorus with changing a few words, even for God, playing with how we refer to God can be a way to do that as well. But it's very important because that's also something that when somebody wanders in, they're going to listen. They're I don't know what it is about us, but our ears are really, really big because we're listening for certain things that indicate one's commitment to the community. And so this book was one of the books that we read at Church on Main, Queer Virtue, what LGBTQ people know about life and faith. And this was a book study that we did that I think went really, really well, and we had a great time. But welcome and education and outreach. Y'all can read books like this. It's really good. And I always have resources. I always have books that Tracy can also attest to. I always have stuff that I like to read, but that also could be used really well in church discussions. So one way to show welcome is to read books that center the experiences of LGBTQ people, making those resources available. Those little printouts that you have are great things to put around the church, put in your Sunday school classrooms. Practice names and pronouns with people in your congregation. So somebody comes in and they have pronouns that don't look like what you assumed, or they have a pronoun that you've never heard before. Get with somebody and be like, let's practice. And say that person's name in a sentence over and over again until you get it, because that's such a beautiful way to show vulnerability and also show love that you put in effort. So practice those things. Like, it's one thing to just hear, use the right pronouns, but it's another thing to let it be a practice and to use somebody else, who's not gonna be like upset with you because you messed it up, but will give you that grace. And hopefully that person will give you grace as well. Include trans and non-binary people in gender-specific groups. Also create some groups that are not gendered. So if you have, for example, a woman who is trans, invite her to the women's group. Don't assume that she doesn't want to be in the women's group, regardless of what you think she looks like. Invite her to the group. She says she's a woman, let her come. But, so that kind of thing. But also, if somebody's non-binary and they're like, I'm not a man or a woman, but I'd love to learn about that topic, let them come. Also, try to have groups that aren't gendered, right? Try to have groups that it doesn't really matter. We're just all here to talk about this topic or this scripture or whatever, being really intentional about that. As far as outreach, local events such as pride marches, festivals, health fairs is one way to be active in the community and meet some new people. We had the opportunity to participate in a local pride, and then this following year the statewide one. And it's a great opportunity because people also don't get used to seeing churches at those things. And so it's a powerful way of doing evangelism, but not in, we want to convert you. Evangelism in the sense of people like us exist. There are churches that will embrace you. That's the kind of evangelism we're talking about. Not we want to change you, but we love you, and we know that there aren't enough Christians here. So those types of things. Health fairs. Sometimes those are community events where there may be LGBTQ specific health topics coming up, and so that's also a way to be involved. You can also build partnerships, give financial gifts to individuals you might know who are struggling, or to organizations that focus on LGBTQ issues. I talked a little bit about the suicide rates, and so there are a lot of LGBTQ people who have considered suicide or who have attempted suicide, and so organizations that focus on that, like hotlines and things, are also good places to give and to give your support to, because they're seeing these people every single day. And I've worked on those hotlines, and I can tell you that about 70% of them were LGBTQ. Most of them under 15. And so organizations that focus on serving that community are great places for churches to build relationships with. So if you're interested, I can give you a couple resources, but places like the Trevor Project or Trans Lifeline are great places to send money to and gifts, and just let them know that you're thinking of them, that you support their work, because they are working with a lot of kids and youth who are struggling. Again, we already talked about advocacy, staying informed on what's happening locally and nationally, and getting involved. Get into some trouble is what I wrote here, is that sometimes advocacy in our climate requires ruffling some feathers. It requires getting on some people's nerves when it comes to things that are really unjust for people and really unsafe for people. We need to make our faces known, and we need to, if you are ordained, you need to tell them. If you are a pastor of a church, you should wear your collar. Like, they need to know that there are people of faith who are also going to challenge them. If you are a member of a church, you should tell them, right? Like, I'm a Presbyterian, or I'm a member of this church and I care about this, because there's a lot of things that are continuing to happen across the country that we can participate in stopping. So that welcoming and inclusive language I talked about is also fun. God is so much more than a dude, right? And like, in theory, we know that, but I think a lot of times our language doesn't reflect that. Like, we know, like, God is a spirit, God is not a human, God is not a man, but I would not know that by the way that some of us talk. So welcoming and inclusive language is about making room for those identities that are often erased, ignored, or demonized. And so we can reflect in our language who we care about. And so recognizing, again, various kinds of family formations, especially in our society today. People who are not LGBTQ are going to have different types of families, and we should just get used to talking about single people, talking about divorced people, talking about adoption, talking about same-gender relationships, even talking about chosen family. Like, I sometimes have some issues with the familial language, because LGBTQ people don't always have good relationships with their families. And so we can use family and also use things like friends and community as well. Consider gender neutral or less commonly used words for God. And so referring to God as she, referring to God as they, the unknowable one. The uncontainable one is one that we can refer to as they as well. The 3 in 1, right? Like, I know that that's uncomfortable for some folks, but isn't that even more theologically rich, right? To use they. You can also use gender-neutral terms like spirit, loving one. A lot of us already say holy God, right? It doesn't have to be gendered. It could be a lot of things. You can say Mother God. You could say God who is the comforter. All of these different ways that you can play with. And then I put in some other examples, but in those pamphlets that you got, the one that's called Well-Chosen Words, there are other examples as well. People at Church on Main may or may not notice that I do this, but I have really moved away from saying brothers or sisters, especially from the assurance of pardon. Siblings in Christ is usually my go-to, or family of God is usually my go-to. And so instead of husband and wife, we can refer to partners or spouse. Instead of brothers and sisters, we can say siblings. We can say things like every gender or all genders. We can say children of God. We can say people, family, kindred. My favorite, y'all. Y'all always means all. That's one of the good things that y'all has given us. It is gender neutral. We can say beloved. We can say followers of God, neighbors. I often refer to folks as friends. And so those are all ways that we can play around with our language so that we're not singling out any particular gender. The only thing about that is if you do want to single out a particular gender, like for example, we're working through a sermon series right now about women in the Bible. The difference, though, is when I say women, I'm actually talking about women, right? Like, and so I'm singling out a group because that's who I'm talking about. I'm not saying that those are the only people that exist. And so if you say men and women, make sure that that's really who you mean. Otherwise, just make it neutral when you're talking about a group of people or all that exists. And so this is really tiny, but I just put it up as an example. There are actually congregational assessments that you can do where, and I can send this to anybody who wants it, but there are actually assessments that you can do as an individual, with your session, with your board members, where you can rate yourself on a number of categories as how welcoming you think you are on a variety of topics. And the good thing is, if you aren't where you want to be, it'll help you figure out what the next steps are. And so I think that this is a really good resource and a really good toolkit for us to use as we're moving through these topics. So if anybody wants this, I'll make it available. I'll send it to Tracy, and it'll be readily available. But this is a great starting place for doing that honest assessment and then figuring out a plan. And so now is your time to maybe take a deep breath first. Let's take a deep breath together. And as you're reflecting and breathing, if there are any questions or things that you would like to share, this would be a good time. Whew, okay. All right, let's start from the front and then move our way back. Yes?
I have a question that dates back to my arrival here as I was pondering the baskets of buttons.
Mm-hmm.
My name is Alice, by the way, and I am chronically curious. I wonder why it itself is never an option. I've seen it once or twice in print.
Mm.
And I just would like, I'm very interested in your comments on how the community has dealt with that as an option. It seems to me as something that would be helpful for one who is leaning into, say, asexuality. Anyway, if you could explore that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So about it, that is typically not the way that we refer to people. However, there are people who use it. And so there will be times where you see it. And so you have printouts of that earlier slide. And in there is a little chart of lesser known pronouns. So usually what you'll hear is she, he, they. But then there's also on that chart lesser known ones. And I don't know if it is on there, but I have seen it before being used kind of with the same impulse of, I don't fit either or neither or both. And so it is less used, but you might see it. But it usually just isn't the way that people refer to people rather than objects. But some folks find some comfort in it. So just depends on the person. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, and then, yes.
I'm wondering, how do you transition from our church, which has one women's bathroom, one men's bathroom? How do you make that transition into, because the men's has one stall, one urinal, women's has one stall and two stalls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do you make that change?
Well, also in the resources, there is also, and I think this will be helpful for a couple of the things that I'm working on, but there are also people to walk you through how do you actually transition a bathroom into a gender neutral one, One of the ways would be to just say, there are 2 bathrooms. This one has a urinal. So that way, anyone who needs to use a urinal knows that they can go there, and it's not gender specific. But there are also ways for the long term where you can put it so that those things are in every bathroom, and it's just a single stall bathroom, and anyone can use it. But there are resources to help people walk through, how their specific building is laid out so that they can make little steps. Mm-hmm. Yes, let's.
This is a big question that's really troubling me. Tell me if I should ask you or somebody personally instead of sharing this whole story as I started. Maybe someday I hope has become Hannah. A transgender woman came to my church about a month and a half ago. Did not want to participate in our ritual personal welcome. I had said beforehand we had one and that we didn't have to participate. The person doing the ritual welcome that day actually made eye contact with this person and said, I see you there not making eye contact, like lower. We had a great conversation after church, but I was not surprised not to see her back. She came back this past Sunday with her partner, who appears a woman, and we said nothing about it, any such thing. Had a much shorter conversation, but at the end of that conversation, she said, this is where we're going to go. My situation is, I can't decide if I'm being overprotective, worrying, will my congregation adjust, or not. Any helpful suggestions? I don't want to not trust my congregation, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. I would try and have the conversation with both. I would probably have a conversation with the congregation about the situation that has come in that maybe is new to people, and sort of just get their feelings about it. Not on Sunday, but any time where you can talk to folks and just say, hey, there's this elephant in the room, we need to talk about it. How are folks feeling? How equipped do people feel? And get their sense of where they're at, and some suggestions that you might have from something like this. And then if she would take you up on, I'm assuming it's she, her, it may not be, but if this person is open to you talking with them individually, I would also say that have an honest conversation with them. Say, look, I am really excited that you're here. Folks are going to be all over the place with this. It's going to be new for them. You may hear some things that aren't welcoming. How do you feel about that? What are some ways that I can support you? Would you like me to pull them aside? Would you like me to correct them publicly? Get their sense of how they want support. That way, their decision to move forward is informed. So that's one suggestion that I would have. All right. Who else? Okay, yeah, David.
One of the things that for me has had an impact is the church's pictorial directory. If you have
Like pictures? Gotcha.
directory, so you have a gay couple and a lesbian couple in that says something.
Yeah.
Two men with a child,
Yeah.
two women with a child. That's a real
Yeah.
thing.
That's really true. That's a good point, too. Yeah, anytime where you're having any display of families, you want to make sure that you include all kinds of families. Like, people are going to be looking for all those kinds of clues. Like, there are these pictures of families. Is mine represented? That's very important. Yeah, one more. Over here, yeah.
Yeah, so that speaks also to making sure that the website is not just on the surface, but baked into it
Yeah.
is inclusive language. So whoever's controlling your website needs to make sure that meta tags on just about every page you can think of say that they're friendly to gay and lesbian people, all inclusive, whatever sort of language you want to use, make sure it's there in a more specific way.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Good point. Yeah. 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 Yeah, those are all really great points. And that's another point, too. I mean, I know I said join a network, but folks also will use, and I can send this information to people afterwards, but folks will use search engines, or there's websites like Church Clarity or Gay Church. Folks will go to those to see, like, in their zip code where they can go. And so getting your church a part of those networks is also a way for people to find you so that they know that they, will be accepted. So, and that'll happen if you join one of the networks, but those are some things to keep in mind. And then Steve, I think you had a question.
So I was just thinking those early slides on the issue of the LGBTQ community brings into sharp focus the broader issue of welcome in general.
Yeah.
Every church welcomes everybody, right? We want young families, we just don't want to shift things. So I think it brings
Yeah.
welcome, right? Great, we want people because we want the money, or we want them so they'll be like us.
Yeah.
But this brings into sharp focus that issue of how welcoming are we, and in this case specifically to the community that much of the culture says should be welcomed anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I hope that focus is really clear. And yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these things can be said for any community. Welcoming of, people with disabilities could be a whole other thing. So at least a couple of those slides would still be true. But yeah, there's very specific things that we can all do to be a little bit sharper. Yeah, Angela. Yeah. 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 Yeah, that's a great question. I get really excited about this because it really is like continuing to be relevant. I will say, not every queer person is going to say this, but I will say I don't have an issue all the time with things that are gendered, especially if it's like for women. Like, I understand why you don't want men there, like as a woman, I get that. And I think it's important for us to have safe spaces. I think the thing is, like, if somebody wanted to come and they don't necessarily fit that, could they? Or if they don't look like a woman to you, but they say that they are and they live as a woman, could they still come? And I think the answer would have to be yes. And I think also, one way to say it is marginalized genders, because that includes women and non-binary people and trans people, not men necessarily. But marginalized genders covers a lot, and it still doesn't bring in, some of those differences. So that's one way. But I would also just try and have offerings that are that anyone can come to as well. Mm-hmm. All right. Maybe. I don't know. It depends. We'll take one more question and then wrap up. Hi. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So that, I mean, there's one way there. I know that we do have to close, but we could talk a little bit more about that. Sorry, did you have one more thing? Yes, I can make them available. But we can talk more about that. Marginalized genders, again, is one way. There may be some others, so let's continue the conversation. But thank you all so much.